So, where do we start? Well, let's start in the beginning. Before we dive into all the fine intricacies of UX metrics and design KPIs and all of that, we probably need to first figure out where can we actually make an impact in the first place and how do we make it best. And that's exactly what we need to figure out first. Because if you are struggling and maybe you realize that you're kind of in an organization and you feel a little bit stuck, it's very difficult to show and visualize the impact of your work. It's very hard to show any evidence of the impact that you're producing. Well, then I can guarantee that you're not the only person. But we need to start somewhere. So how do we fix it? Well, the design impact starts where you are. Exactly right here in this very moment where you are. Because eventually every single person around you, every person in your surroundings, the culture, the organization, the team, the structure, they all very much define what you can and what you cannot do and what you can and cannot influence. And the trajectory of that design impact and the limits are very much defined and very much shaped by that context. What does it mean? Well, before I start working on anything, I need to understand where I am, right? And where I belong. And so that for me is the path through org charts. I mean, I don't like org charts. Who likes an org chart? But this would be very often the very first thing that I'm going to ask when I work in any project. Why? Well, because I need to understand where I am. I need to understand where exactly in this big, huge tree of like all these different organizational chart, well, tree basically, right? Where am I exactly? What can I change? If I'm living somewhere here and working over here, I need to know who is that person that I'm reporting to. I also need to know who they are reporting to because it kind of visualizes relationships to me, right? But it does more than that. Way more than that, because across the organizations there are two types of stakeholders. On the one hand, people who are important to you in the project. These are people you're working with. These are people who you're reporting to. These are people who have an interest and sort of a kind of a value in you succeeding in this project. These are stakeholders in that project. But on the other hand, you also have always in every organization key influencers. These are people who would love to support you if they know that you existed, because very often they might be these promoters of UX initiatives, CX initiatives, usability initiatives, user-centric initiatives, and they really believe that this is important and they care that you care. They just need to know that you exist. And so in many ways, this is all around finding and identifying the right people. Because when I look at a chart like this, I see people, but I see people who have mortgages, who have pets, who have children, who have schools to pay for. And probably the last thing they think of is how your design work is going to change that work, right? In any way, most of the time, they actually see you as a disruptor, as somebody who comes in and basically changes the way they're working. With your design changes, with the filters changing, with search filters, with the way of publishing changes and anything like that. So you will not be surprised if you realize that you will be blocked. In fact, the default behavior for all of your design impact that you're working on over here is to be blocked. Well, you might be feeling that, you do all this incredible, and it is incredible, design work. And then eventually somebody must notice, and then it will just go forward and push forward until eventually it will kind of really circle around the entire organization. Now, that usually doesn't happen because people usually are going to be blocking things that are disrupting their usual way of working. So we kind of need to kind of build those relationships. And I'm not saying that all of these people over here are your, enemies. They want you to fail. No, of course not. But they're not your allies either. And so to make that impact flow, to enable it to flow through the entire organization, you kind of need to build alliances and relationships first. And so that, for me, happening through the lens of this org chart. And it's kind of ironic that very often when we look at this, it's also neatly, beautifully organized, but the reality in most organizations is not like that, is it? No. Every time you end up with chaos. Chaos! A lot of chaos everywhere. A little bit more organized chaos, a little bit less organized chaos. Chaotic chaos, slightly less chaotic chaos, but a lot of chaos. Because all of a sudden there is a big reorganizational effort and everything changes. Managers move, managers leave. There is this deadline that we need to hit, do whatever it takes, cut corners, change teams, bring more people on board, bring fewer people on board, dependencies, coordinators, work in progress, we need to probably put this on hold. No, let's pull it back. A lot of chaos that kind of needs to be somehow orchestrated, I guess, right? And so how do we make it work? How do we even succeed and thrive and make any impact in the first place in an environment which maybe works like this? Well, we know how we work, right? We know how we work. So these are the 5 layers of user experience as positioned by Jesse James Garrett back in maybe 2006 or 2007 or so, and beautifully visualized by Austin Young. And we're basically looking here for different lenses through which we can explore our UX work. So we can look at it through the lenses of things that are really concrete, like surface, like things we do in Figma, the buttons we're designing, the accordions we're shaping and things like that. The surface. We also can look at it from a very abstract perspective. Strategy, business needs, user needs. And there is, of course, a lot of stuff in between. There is also skeleton. You need to think about the skeleton of the screen, the layout, the content design, things like that kind of make up for the page that we're going to present, or pages we're going to views that we're going to present. But I also need to look into the good old-fashioned and very important information architecture, where we're going to do things like tree testing, card sorting, things like that, but also interaction design, accessibility. This is where it fits in. And then we also have scope, financial, functional, and content requirements right here as well. And then here we are in strategy. And in fact, the UX metrics and the impact that we're producing and we're talking about, they're probably going to end up over here. Not very surprising, of course. So kind of moving between concrete and abstract. A different way to look at it is through the lens of the spaces that we're exploring. Because we are mapping most of the time, first, when we're designing anything, we're mapping the realities that we have in front of us into a problem space. Then we try to identify things that need solving, and then we'll look into a solution space. In reality, it looks messy, right? We're looking at this really complex, messy world with all these dependencies around them. Then we observe. We observe behaviors and we look for patterns. We look at things that are happening through user research and analytics. Potentially, we might be looking at a very complicated domain like enterprise, healthcare, things like that, where failure is not an option. And this is where you need to learn terminology, you need to learn processes, you need to know how this works and the mental model that exists in that world. And out of that, we try to get these user needs, right? What we believe users are trying to achieve and why, hopefully based on research. And this is our problem space then. And from there, we move on here to develop a strategy, to look into relationships, actions, terminology, and policies and processes, and then eventually looking all the way to the top, where we're looking into interaction structure and then the surface as well. So reality, problem space, solution space. This is our world. So how does it relate to measuring? Well, when we start measuring, we need to understand what we can measure. We cannot really measure reality. Right? We cannot really measure the problem space, but we can measure the solution space. The question is how we do that. Because when you measure anything, right, there is a very simple principle. We need to have before and after. And that means we need to have this sort of cause and effect scenario relationship. That's really what it is about. That means that whenever we're doing something over here in our solution space, we need to be able to measure it in order to be able to understand if it actually makes any impact whatsoever or not. But impact on what? Because we shouldn't be mixing correlation and causation. Correlation means you change something, it has a direct impact on something else. Causation could mean, well, we changed it here, maybe something else has changed over there, which actually influenced that part over here. So it's not necessarily directly connected. Sometimes it might be very difficult to visualize those parts and how they all fit together, but keep that in mind. We'll look into that a little bit later. But one thing is certain. Very certain, in fact. Stakeholders want to do more of what has already worked in the past. That's always like that. And most of the time, what they want is return on investment. And when you're speaking about management and what is a typical return on investment, usually we're looking at something like ROI more than 5%. This is something that just comes up quite a bit. Whenever you invest in something, you want to get at least 5% on top of that, right? So what does it mean for us? Well, that return on investment is not necessarily representing itself in revenue. It doesn't have to be revenue. It can also be reduced costs, it could be reduced expenses, and it's really, really, really undervalued and should be kind of emphasized and tattooed on everybody's shoulders, risk mitigation. Design is an incredible risk mitigation tool. And the more you repeat that in that big meeting, the more impactful you will be, right? Because in the end, you are all about making intentional decisions by reducing risk of working on the wrong thing, building the wrong thing, spending an incredible amount of time, delivering something that nobody really needs. That's a massive, massive impact that design produces. But to articulate that, we need to position the value we're creating over here with our design work by the value we delivered. In other words, we need to indicate that design impact that we're producing over here and the business impact we're kind of reaching with it and need to be kind of visualized and connected in some way. And that will be kind of, again, from the lens of design KPIs, as we will see a little bit later. But in general, there are 5 to 6 things that most businesses care about, right? They want to increase revenue, they want to decrease costs, they want to increase new business, they want to increase existing business, and they also want to increase shareholder value, right? So in any way, of course, if you look at it and think about it, well, how can I kind of work on my filters and change my filters over here and increase shareholder value? This is like not connected like at all. Yeah, you're right. Very often what you can do though is with good design, you can always hit 2 of those, increasing revenue and decreasing costs. Because of course, whenever you do good design work, good usability, accessibility, just fewer people complain, fewer people actually report and try to kind of run inquiries with customer service. You can always make a case like that, right? So these 2 are relatively easy to track. And I think very often we have this conversation about return on investment of design. And I love this quote by Erica Hall, who said that ROI of design is such a nonsense concept. It's like saying the ROI of trucks. Well, investing more in trucks yield a return? Sure, for UPS. But design is just systematic, intentional decisions. You need to know which decisions to focus on, which may not look like design, but actually really is. And so if we want to be kind of more intentional to visualize the work that we're doing, right, and want to kind of get this notion of return on investment, if you like, well, design is just a path to getting things done well, right, without losing kind of the focus and also kind of working on the wrong thing. That's pretty much what it is about. So previously we said that measuring is all around before and after, cause and effect, right? But this is not a full picture, is it? No, this is not a full story. Because one thing that's really missing, and I think it's really valuable to invest time and effort into, is to visualize that design impact that you're producing. And I think it's really important and yet very often not really discussed. And so it really kind of brings me back to this wonderful article by Paul Adams, who used to be a chief product officer at Intercom and now moved on to become a VP of design at Intercom. And he wrote about the end of navel gazing. And what he meant by that is that every time you look around on LinkedIn or on Twitter and whatnot, you'll find this kind of charts like that, which basically place UX at the heart of everything, at the center of the universe, if you like, at this magical glue that connects the business, the technology, and the design. And unfortunately, this could not be further from the truth. Because once you start looking around and you realize how organizations work, you'll find that very often it's always more or less the same. You have departments. You have different departments. You have sales, support, recruiting, finance, HR, analytics, engineering, design, that's us, designers. And then you have research, PM, business operations, and marketing. And they all circle as satellites around leadership. They all report to leadership. That leadership can be different. It can be, top-down leadership, very conservative, very strict, very kind of looking at the data all the time. It could be quite flexible and informal and friendly. That also can happen. It can be very flat, can be very strict, can be anything in between. But there is leadership. And leadership gets reports from everywhere, right? And in fact, when you look around, like sales and support and recruiting and marketing, actually, there is one significant thing that they all have in common. And that's the strict number of very strictly defined key performance indicators, or KPIs. Sales must sell, and they will be reporting how well they sell to leadership. So leadership is very much aware of sales, and they are very much important to leadership because basically they report all the time, right? Marketing is the same story. When we look at the traffic growth or leads and stuff like that, they know fairly well how well marketing is doing. They also know quite a lot about finance and recruiting and HR and analytics and business operations. They are really very much familiar with it. But when it comes to us, usually we don't have clearly defined set of design KPIs that would basically land on leadership's dashboard every 2, 3, or 4 months. That just doesn't happen. And very often it feels like, we always need to be we're kind of designing pixels, and in the end we are basically putting things in front, and how can we know if this is going to make that big needle, move that big needle that business really deeply cares about? But maybe we can tap into this after all. And I think it's very clear, of course, that there are strong connections between all different units and different departments. So as designers, we need marketing, we need sales, we need analytics, we need finance, we need recruiting, we need support, we need everyone. And of course, our work is very dependent on their work as well, and their work is very much dependent on our work as well. So the best thing you can do is to really create this sort of alliances between different people in different departments. And in fact, mostly because when you look at sales and marketing, they're really clearly visible and important to leadership. If you want to, let's say, run some proxy testing, the best way to connect is through sales. For a very simple reason, because there has never been more overlap between what designers want and what sales want these days. Many products are subscription driven, which means you need to maintain a relationship. If you want to maintain a relationship, you need to understand how to improve that relationship, which means you need to understand how the customer is thinking, what they're doing, what they like, what they don't like, how do you make them happy, how do you keep them subscribing. And this is very similar to research that we're doing in the UX side of things. So it wouldn't be very surprising that every now and again, you find that researchers are sitting within the sales team or customer success team rather than actually within the UX team. So there is a huge overlap. So you can actually learn a lot and do a lot through sales or with sales. And in general, like if we look at it, right, I think that there is this very useful notion of expansion, just expanding the view. So you might be a designer, you might have a design guild participation where you actually just join in every now and again, right? But I would kind of encourage you to just explore and maybe look at other guilds in other areas that you maybe have interest but not that much interest. Just see what are they like, what are they talking about, how are they talking about, what are they thinking? And it's not necessarily just about, building alliances or anything like that so they can actually support your initiatives later. Right? That could be a part of it, but it's not necessarily the only part of it. Because the other part is to just really understand the language that they're speaking. Because it's all about creating kind of alignment and understanding, right? To push that value up, the value of design up. Because if you start looking around, like imagine in a big meeting, the business language that is usually spoken in a big meeting is vastly, vastly different from the UX language that we're usually speaking when we speak about our design work. So the business language is full of fighter-like or war-like terms. Conquer the market, capture the mind share, target the customers, destroying the competition, fighting for market share, converting and following up people. Why would you convert them? Just let them be for a moment. Employing a sales force, hiring headhunters, picking the battles, and then, those really, really weird ones and eerie ones attract more eyeballs, get users hooked, increase lifetime value. Every time I think about lifetime value, I think about the person who is pulling blood from somebody else and just measures how much they can actually exploit them through this lifetime. Really, really horrible. When I walk in a big room, I cannot speak like this. This is just not me. But I will be very deliberate and very strategic about not speaking the UX language that we all like and feel like we understand, right? So reducing friction, difficult, because there is nothing about reducing friction over here. So it's just not very clear how that actually helps exactly. Improving consistency. That's also something that's actually quite confusing to many business people because there is no business case to do for that. There's probably kind of a conversation that comes up at saying, so you improve consistency and you spent on this 2 months? How did it improve in terms of our business targets for the next quarter? It's very difficult to make that connection. Of course, you can speak with the language of efficiency and stuff like that, but it's really, really hard to do. And then empowering users, enabling and helping users, meeting expectations, bridging the gap for users and the business, customer service, building trust, understanding user needs, and also developing empathy. This is also kind of terms that might be really coming across wrong because people just don't understand them. So how do we speak then? Well, I can't speak the business language, but I will not be using the UX language. My language that I have adopted that works for me is a language of design KPIs and UX metrics. And that's exactly what we're going to dive in later in the course, where I basically try desperately to connect the business objectives we have all the way on the top with design initiatives and research insights that we already have gathered at the bottom. And in between, there is this language of metrics, UX metrics, and design KPIs that we're reporting to senior management repeatedly every 4 to 6 months to indicate the notion of design success, right? And so we'll be speaking about that in a lot of detail later. And I think a really, really important part around this, and this is just a visualization tool, kind of almost like a storytelling tool for me, but the really important part about this is that we probably need to be pushing back on those rigid thinking about how things should be, but really look at how things are. And maybe, figure out how we can actually do with it, but also how we can improve it long term. And what I mean by that is, for example, the double diamond. When you kind of look and explore the problem space, you kind of get the insights, and then you decide what problems to fix, and then you explore solutions, and then you deliver the solutions, and then you launch. Most organizations just don't work like this. I mean, sure, we can try to change that, but they just don't work like that. Change will take quite a bit of time. It's worth trying, but it's just not how they work. Because most of the time, and you might be in the same ship like me, you end up in a situation where you're getting a solution to a problem that you didn't know even existed, right? And so there is a very strong confidence that we need to do this. And so you need to start exploring how to actually do this, how to deliver. And then you launch, and then eventually, maybe if it launches well, then you probably will have time to explore how it's working, gather some insights, and keep refining it, right? Or if it doesn't launch well, then you probably will never get to that research phase at all, and you're just going to move on to another solution to a problem that you didn't know existed. And this is a reverse double diamond, as Andy Budd coined it. Right? So which is, again, very representative, again, for the scenarios that we get in at work. So the other thing is, for example, customer journeys. Customer journeys represent a particular snapshot of a journey, but not necessarily a full snapshot of a journey, because there is always things that are happening before, and there are things that are happening after. Because while we are mostly focusing on the product, very often what we also need to think of is awareness, the education, the acquisition, the onboarding, the usage, the support, the loyalty, and it also requires design work, right? This is also where we can make a tremendous impact as designers. All right, so what do we take from this then? Well, I think it's worth noting, and this is probably just kind of a not very groundbreaking really, but this is really emphasizes the reality. Design to many organizations doesn't matter anywhere near as much as most designers, me myself included, think, but it actually matters way more than most executives think, right? And this is what we actually need to be really aware about when we're actually emphasizing or explaining the value that we're providing. So let's pull it all together. What have we learned? Well, design impact starts where you are, right here, in a company, in an organization, in the unit where you're working. You need to be enabling that flow of design to across the organization if you want to make a huge impact. That design must be perceived not just as a pixie dust or pixel work, but as an enabler of both user needs and business needs. We always know that good UX will always decrease costs and mitigate risks. It's always the same story, it's always like that. So you can always make a case like that. You always need other people to carry your design in action, and you will always need to build relationships and allies right here. It might be a really good idea to just go ahead and join other units and see how they speak, what language they're speaking, what is important to them to kind of understand their priorities and what they care about. And ultimately, whenever you are trying to kind of make a case about what the work that you're doing, you always need to think about what is the business lens of it. Like, what is the business value that you're producing here? Remote or not remote? And to do that, and that's exactly what we're going to cover next, we need to look into measuring the impact locally, where you actually change things. Maybe you're just working on filters and you want to improve them. Have you improved them or not? But also globally, across the most important customer journeys, key customer journeys, if you like. But we will get there. For now, design impact starts where you are. You can make a tremendous impact. You just need to be able to show before and after, and that's important, visualize it well. And once you do, people will move mountains for you.